and welcome back. My name is still Mikael Nytsröm. Still work for Trusek, and someone asked me for my email address. That's my email address. That's my website, and that's my Twitter alias. And Johan usually says, if you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter. And I agree. You need to be on Twitter. You don't need to tweet. You just need to follow someone on Twitter. You don't need to follow me. You can follow, yeah, you can follow Taylor Swift, but I think that doesn't really apply to your profession. Now, XenServer Virtual Machine Manager 2016 Technical Preview 5 hasn't been updated much from TP4. They added a few things. I would say they made some of the features work actually, and then they lost some. But eventually, the release of this is going to be pretty nice. Now, the first thing about System Center is something we have heard customers saying. Is System Center still going to be around? Isn't that going to vanish, disappear? Isn't Microsoft Azure Stack going to be the only solution? Blah 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 blah. No. The System Center 2016 suite is not very much new stuff. It's small stuff. So if you look on Virtual Machine Manager, it's basically two things. It's managing the workload. That is virtual machines. Do you need to have it? Can't you do it in Hyper-V Manager? Well, if you have two VMs and one host machine, you don't need Virtual Machine Manager. Absolutely, you can do it in Hyper-V Manager. If you have a larger environment, you either need to build your own management tool, which is going to be based on PowerShell or WMI, but most people don't build their own management tools. Most people use something, and in that case, well, XenServer Virtual Machine Manager is the best bet for virtual management. But the name XenServer Virtual Machine Manager is incorrect, and they realized that a couple of years ago. Now they can't change the name. The name should be something different. It should be called System Center Fabric Management, because that is actually what it's doing. It's managing the fabric, the hypervisors, the storage, and the network. That is what it is. So that means that you can compare Virtual Machine Manager with another pretty famous product called System Center Configuration Manager. That has been designed to manage client machines. And this is meant for managing server workload, and above all, the fabric beneath it. They've done a lot of things in compute. For instance, they added the full life cycle management of nano servers, meaning you can now deploy nano servers, not in TP5 because it's broken, because it can't join the domain. You're going to fix that, but currently you can't do that. You can either deploy physical machines to running nano, or you can deploy, of course, virtual machines that is supposed to run nano. They also support rolling upgrades from within the console. It is the coolest thing I ever played with. Here is a 2012 R2 Hyper-V cluster. You click on the cluster and you say upgrade to 2016, and it does that by bare metal redeploying the host machines. It's not really upgrading. Well, it's upgrading the cluster, but it's not upgrading the operating system. It's going to use the rolling upgrade feature within the operating system. So it's going to evict the node, move the workload, evict the node, bare metal redeploy the node, join that back to the cluster, move the workload, and then continue until it's done. And you can do that with both Hyper-V clusters and storage. So here's your storage spaces solution that you're using in 2012 R2. You want to upgrade it to 2016. While you're running it in production, you're going to be bold and say, upgrade to 2016. And it's going to move the workload from one of the nodes, redeploy the host, move the data, keep on doing that until it's done. I'm not really sure I will ever do that. But of course, you need to try it. So I've been playing with it at home, and it actually works. I just need to be more comfortable, and I need to do it a couple of more times before I actually dare to go to a customer and say, "Hey, it's going to work." Really? You're doing an in-place upgrade of the operating system on the machine that is running everything we have. Yeah, it's going to work. Just need to be more comfortable in that. It is now possible to do a both Hyper-V and scale-out file server converged deployment in one step. I want these 4 nodes to be Storage Spaces Direct and Hyper-V Go based on Nano. Have you ever logged on to Nano? No. Do you need to? No. Do you need to? No. Does it work? Yeah. It doesn't work with Nano, but it works with 2016 when you do a core or UI. They also changed the cluster deployment, which means that we can now do both Hyper-V hosts together with the cluster at the same time. It's a one-step operation. Make these 3 machines that has nothing on them to a Hyper-V cluster now. You still need to wait. It's just, anybody played World of Tanks or something like that? Yeah, great. World of Warships? It's perfect. So I'm starting to recalculate everything I do in how many matches is it going to fit into an upgrade. And I mean, I'm really lousy. My average lifetime is approximately 60 seconds, then I'm dead anyway. But it's fun, and it's easy, and it takes just a couple of minutes to play a game. And you have this rolling upgrade here. You're working, right? And you're playing over here. Anybody try that? It works, right? You can't be in a game that takes forever. It needs to be a short match, 15 minutes maybe. Like, are you busy? Yeah, I'm really busy. Don't bother me. My tank just got shot. It also is possible to add a bare metal node to an existing Hyper-V cluster. That wasn't possible in the previous version. You could only add a node that you first deployed. So now we can just do a bare metal thing to it, which is kind of nice. Whatever. But we can do more things than that. And we need to have this machine up running. This. And by the way, just the short overview. It looks exactly the same way. So you can't really see the difference between 16 and 12R2. You still have the fabric nodes, the logical networks, the VMs and services. The library looks the same. Jobs, settings, basically everything looks the same way. I wouldn't expect anything to change in the release either. I'm actually not going to expect any changes to System Center platforms anywhere, because they can change everything beneath it. They change the engines, the code, the functionality, but changing the UI doesn't really help anyone. Anybody been in that situation? You log on to the new application and go like, where's everything? How do I want my old UI back. Please, can I have that? I hate when they do that on web pages. You're on like the HP web page, you know exactly where to find the firmware and driver, and they go like, oh, look at the new exciting web page. No, I don't want to look on the new I just want to download the freaking firmware. Can I do that? No, you need to go to this site and fill out this form, and it looks different. It takes forever. It's like, you want to kill me. Ugh. But you're going to see small things like this. Host Guardian service setting. That is one thing they, of course, added. Now, when Windows Server 2016 have the ability to host Guardian services. Now, instead of manually doing everything on each server, you can now, on a central location, of course, just click those settings, which is kind of nice. Let's go to the library. You still have the hardware profiles. where you can deploy a machine. I just need to have, oops, just need to have a VHD file. I can steal one from here. Everybody needs a VHD file. That's on my C drive somewhere. Oh, there's snap. HD. Maybe I should grab one of these huge. Screen. Let's see where I put it. Yeah, let's go ahead. Files, HDs. I like when an operating system is below a gig in size. I mean, creating a reference image is like, done. Aren't you installing any applications? No, you can't. But you need to patch it. Yes, I downloaded the latest patch that contains everything and I apply that. And, oh, yeah, but that consumes a lot of space. No, it doesn't. So done. And to see that it shows up, so I have the drive here. Refresh. Find the hard drive. There you go. Let's go to the network first. So they changed stuff in the network, and on purpose I didn't create much. I have a fabric management and I have a corporate network, but I don't have any logical switches and I don't have any port profiles. Well, I have the default port profiles. And as usual, you create a logical switch. And creating a logical switch looks pretty much the same way. A lot of text, nobody reads the text anyway. The uplink switch. And now the uplink team mode is here instead. So, we're going to do a team. And there is a way to set the bandwidth weight that you can do. You have the following settings. Default weight, absolute none. Now, in XenServer Virtual Machine Manager 2016, it is possible to set up a Hyper-V host and manually create the switch, which you should not do, but you can do that. People do that. And after a while, they go like, hey, maybe we should use Virtual Machine Manager. Yeah, let's import that. But then the switches you did create are Hyper-V switches. They are not Virtual Machine Manager switches. So they're going to be treated as legacy switches, and they need to be managed on each and every host. In VMM 2016, you can import those switches. And I played with that, and it doesn't work. Really? You can't do that? Well, you can. It's just that you need to understand something. The switch that you create in Hyper-V Manager doesn't use weight. It uses absolute. And we don't want to have absolute switches. We want to have weighted switches, because if they are weighted, we can have that you're allowed to use percentage of the capacity. But if it's an absolute switch, then it's not percentages. Then it's actually, this is what we're going to reserve for that machine. The bandwidth we're going to preserve for that machine. It is an absolute value. So in my opinion, the way that we create a switch in Hyper-V Manager should not be done that way. But I do have a customer in Switzerland, and they didn't use Hyper-V Manager. They used PowerShell. And they did configure all the switches as weighted switches. So for them, going to Virtual Machine Manager 2016 means they will be possible to import all these switches we have and make them centrally managed switches instead. So it is possible to upgrade existing switches as long as the switch you create here have the same balancing mode, the minimum bandwidth mode. I'm going to create a weighted switch because I'm not going to import one, and go like that, and we need to port profile. Oh, I don't know. Let's say just host management. That's going to be fine. And host management. This, and we need to have an uplink port profile, and this does look very different. It does look very different. And the reason why it looks different is because now you can configure the entire switch, including all the network adapters. Because in Hyper-V 2016, it is possible to use another kind of switch. In 2012 R2, we use a switch and we use a team. First, we create the team. On top of the team, we create the switch. That works. But it does have one problem. It requires you to also have dedicated network adapters for RDMA. So that means that you at least need 4 network adapters. And when I work with the customers, we can see this. Here's 2 network adapters for management. Here's 2 network adapters for VM traffic. And here's 2 network adapters for storage and SMB traffic. So all the servers now has 6 network adapters. It's kind of software-defined networking. It's just not really great. Can you only use 2 network adapters? You can, but then you lose RDMA and you lose RSS, which means now you have a performance issue instead. But now you have less cables. In Hyper-V 2016, together with the Virtual Machine Manager, well, you can do it without Virtual Machine Manager. The new switch type is called SET. It stands for Switch Embedded Teaming. Meaning when you create the team, well, when you create the switch and you define multiple network adapter, it becomes a team. And that team now supports both packet direct and RDMA. So in Windows Server 2016, it's possible to actually do what everybody has been talking about for a long time, software-defined networking. Now you team 2 network adapters, and then you create all the virtual network adapters on them, and you don't lose performance or functionality. Instead, you keep all these things you want to have. Yes, sir. No. So that was a good question. So if you have 2 network adapters that doesn't support RDMA, and you create a team on that, will it magically just support RDMA? No, it doesn't. The functionality needs to be in the network adapter. But that means when I buy a server, because we recently got servers from HP and they asked us how the network configuration should be, and we asked them to put in 2 40 gig network adapters. Are you sure you're not going to have more than that? No. So we're going to use them and team them, and that's it. And they support pass-through on RDMA. They support packet direct to gain better speed and better performance. And that also means that Virtual Machine Manager 2016 now reflects that. It is possible to design the entire switch, including all the virtual network adapters. So here's the uplink switch, and I also at the same time create the management network, and at the same time I can create my SMB1 network, and I can create my SMB2 network at the same time, which is very nice. This one will inherit the network address, and I can specify that it should inherit the connection settings from the host network adapter. This means that if you already deployed the machine, right, and you already have a static IP address, it's not going to be turned into a managed network after it's created a switch. It's going to create a network adapter with the same static IP address and settings and yada yada. So you can now pick and choose the way you deploy it. Either do a bare metal or you deploy it in another way. And if you did deploy it in another way with static IP address and IP address settings, you can now inherit them into your management network adapter. It used to only inherit the MAC address, which works when you do it DHCP based, but it didn't inherit other settings as well. Now you have that option to pick and choose. And it's going to use that port profile. So I can create the entire switch, which is kind of nice. Yay! And that means when you start thinking about doing bare metal deployment, which I can do here, hardware profile. So this is a hardware profile. I'm not going to do a hardware profile. I want to do a physical computer profile. Sorry. It's going to be a VM host, generic host thing, and I'm going to pick the OS image. Okay. Oh, let's pick that one. Doesn't matter what it is. And then we can configure everything as we want to by adding a virtual network adapter. I need to add the physical first, and then I can configure that one to connect to the uplink switch, and then we can configure that one to create a virtual, and then we can specify this and yada yada, which is kind of cool. And we have the ability to, of course, configure the operating system. And anybody see the new feature they actually added? Oh, you can see here is the host guardian service. But they add something that I really like. The ability to run a script. So when we deploy machines using bare metal deployment in Virtual Machine Manager, I can, for instance, add a pre-deployment script, which is a PowerShell command. You can add it and say, before you even lay down the image, would you please run the following stuff to make the BIOS configured correctly, or format a hard drive or something like that. That's doable, but after the machine has been deployed, I need to wait until it has been deployed, and then I can install the HP support pack and the Dell support pack and the driver application, you know, stuff you need to do after the operating system has been done. And we couldn't do that. We can chain two PowerShell commands into each other, but now that also forces me to instruct the customer to run this 452 line long PowerShell script that they need to modify or fetch from an XML file. It just becomes very complicated. So we couldn't really do that when we instructing customers to do their own deployment. Instead, we said, hey, when you deploy the machine, the first thing you need to do after it has been deployed is move it to this location. And then you manually need to do the following steps to, and the customer go like, isn't there kind of a task sequence kind of, you know, you can add things like MBT or config manager? No. But you could, can't you? Why didn't they do that? They didn't. Now they have. So with the ability of adding a script, I can, for instance, specify cmd.exe with a parameter of /c, and then I can actually do whack scvmm01 /public /install hpstuff.ps1 and specify that it should run. This is pretty much the same way we can add a custom package to an existing machines. It's just we can tie it into the existing deployment. So with Virtual Machine Manager 2016, when we say, is it possible to do a bare metal deployment of a host machine so it is working when it's done? The answer is yes. The answer used to be kind of, we just need to do a few things manually after or run a script after. And I don't like when you're forced to have like a 2 or 3 step thing, because there's always a glitch somewhere, or you need to wait. Just being the, well, I can play World of Tanks, but even that doesn't make sense. And the thing is that I already have this done because this is the way we did it in 2012 R2. So I have I would say about 15 different ready-made packages. So guess what? When I saw this the first time, it's like, yeah, I can use everything I already created. Just slam it in and I'm good to go. And this also supports a reboot. So we can say run this script, and after you did this script, you need to reboot, because you know that the HP support packet, Dell, they always require reboot, even if they really don't do that. But they do that. Maybe there's a firmware upgrade. So they can reboot, run the next script, reboot, run the next script, and keep on doing that until they are done. That means when they are done, they are done. And since we can do the cluster in one step, that means that now we can do bare metal to cluster, including all third-party application that needs to be done. So now it's done. It's really done. That we didn't have in 2012 R2. We had the kind of, and I don't like kind of. It is also possible, if you add multiple script, of course, because you can do that, is to have them in a certain order. And there is a limitation on number of scripts you can have, but I think most of you will you can fix this in 99 steps. If you can't fix it in 99 steps, give me a call. I can help you to lower it down to maybe a 98 or something like that. This is true. So they did. This is just a small thing, but for me, it now becomes possible to say, hey, I'm going to deploy a nano server with everything it needs. And it can. Here's another thing you can do, because people are talking about, we need to do your nano server, we want to do nano server. The trick with nano server is that everything is remote configured. You can't really poke around in it. What we do is this. We usually use a UI server. The first time I'm going to deploy anything, I do it with the UI server. Because the UI server, I can manually install the application. I can manually run the PowerShell script and see what happens. I can manually click on the network adapter and see the default settings. And then I translate everything that needs to be changed into PowerShell. I verify against the UI machine. And the only thing I do in the end is replace the VHDX file from the UE version, the GUI version, to the either core or the nano. If it works on that one, it should absolutely work on that one instead. If you don't want to do nano, you can still do core, of course, but that's the way to do it. So I think that is a really nice idea of doing that. When it comes to the upgrade stuff, you have the... no, it's not the cluster. If there was a cluster, you will see that you can select the cluster and say upgrade the cluster. It's pretty easy. It's scary the first time. Trust me, it's really, really scary. Don't do it in production. Since Windows have the ability to change the memory, now we can do it here. Since Windows have the ability to name network adapters, change network adapters, and all that stuff, it just reflects everything you can do in 2016 can now be done in the Virtual Machine Manager console, which is kind of nice. You can also specify the type of checkpoints you want to do. So whatever you can see in the operating system in 2016 that is new also is automatically reflected in Virtual Machine Manager. There are a few things you still need to do in PowerShell. One of them being that the switch now do ACLs. It is possible based on permission to tell what machine can communicate with what machine using what port. That needs to be done in PowerShell. It can either be done in PowerShell on the switch itself in Hyper-V, but they move that PowerShell commandlet into Virtual Machine Manager, so you can centrally now manage the ACL ports. But that's one of the things that is still only going to be in PowerShell. For network, well, we do have the isolation and the consistent naming stuff. The switches, as you saw, has been easier, and it is possible to convert them. And they added one thing that I really like, and that is when you're dealing with switches and deploy it, the current message you get back is that it couldn't be done. And it error out, and it says contact your administrator. And what you have that message is you are the administrator, and that means you need to go and pray somewhere in a corner and really hope for everything to work. And Google is going to be your friend, and you're going to find other people in the same situation, and nobody seems to have any clue what's going on. Now it's actually telling you exactly what step failed, where it tried to do it. So it doesn't solve the problem. It just gives you a reasonable amount of effort to figure out exactly what was wrong. And now you can manually try it using PowerShell or something like that. So they did that, which is kind of nice. When it comes to storage, they did a lot of things. It is possible to now deploy and configure storage spaces direct, which is kind of nice. In both disaggregated and hyper-converged. So what's the difference between a disaggregated and a hyper-converged solution? Well, a hyper-converged solution means that you're running both Hyper-V and storage in the same machine, meaning that you have the 4-node cluster or a 3-node cluster, and you don't have a separate storage or a separate hypervisor. Everything is one box, and it contains everything. Doesn't VMware have that solution? Yes, they do. Is that really cool? Yes, it is. Is that really killing the SANs? Yes, it is. You can do it today with Nutanix, for instance, in 2012 or 2, because they're doing the same thing. So what Microsoft is doing, that is they're allowing Virtual Machine Manager to do this. Couldn't you do that in the previous version? Yes, you could, but you couldn't add it as a storage and at the same time say it was a hypervisor. Because if it was managed as storage and you try to add it as a Hyper-V at the same time, go like, no, 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 no. You already added those machines and they are classified as storage. Yeah, but they run Hyper-V as well. Well, then you need to remove it from storage and then it can become only Hyper-V. No, they are both. Well, we don't support that, so they can't. No. Now they can. But that only applies to 2016. They also include the storage replication feature in the console. So now it's possible to right-click on a machine and say, hey, I want to replicate this machine to whatever machine. It's not going to be a VMM replication. It's going to use the 2016 replication engine, which is either synchronous or asynchronous. If you ever think of it and you want to set it up, there's one thing you need to remember. And if you currently are investigating the possibility to do replicated storage and you talk with the vendor, they go like, nah, you have a really bad network. We can't replicate between your locations. Well, if you can't do it today, you can't do it here either, because the requirements is going to be the same. Approximately less than 3 milliseconds of latency is fine. I think they support up to 5. But you really don't want to have 5 seconds latency, because when you do a synchronous replication, it means it needs to write to both locations and then return the successful write information back to your host. If you have a latency in 5 milliseconds, that means that if your solution you have today is kind of slow, it's going to become bad and really slow, because you need to add 5 milliseconds for every write, because it needs to write on the other end. That's nice. Another thing they add was the quality of services thing, which is really nice. They do have that today. If you create a virtual machine, I can go into Virtual Machine Manager and I can right-click here and do settings, and I can specify a hard drive, and I can specify quality of service. That's nice. You can specify did anybody try this? This is one of the best practical jokes ever you can find. It's so darn fun. What you can do here is this. You can use a PowerShell script that goes from 5 IOPS to 10,000. Back to 5 and 10,000. And it does that every 10 minutes. And then you ask the guy that is working with the server, well, he's going to call you. It's really strange. It's go like fast, slow, fast, slow, fast. I don't see any issues on my side. Maybe your app is really bad. Yeah, I'm going to investigate that. And then you can send him in on a wild goose chase for a couple of hours. Oh, great. Perfect. Lunch. No. Yeah. Dinner? Lunch? Yeah. Now, the bad thing about this is that this can only be done after you created a virtual machine. So you're in Virtual Machine Manager, and maybe you're using Azure Pack, or maybe you're manually deploying machines or whatever. Someone is building machines. And you always need to remember to find the new hard drives and set a maximum IO on each and every drive. Now, have any of you forgotten anything in your life? Never happens, right? No, never happens. And this is one of the things that you, of course, never forget. So, and the problem with this is that the way quality of service works is that everybody needs to have this configuration. Otherwise, another machine that doesn't have the setting doesn't have a limitation at all. So what they did in Virtual Machine Manager is that they have a global policy. So now you can define a global policy and say, on this storage, the maximum amount of IOPS per VM or per disk. That depends on how you sell this. You can always be mean and say, well, try to add another hard drive and it will be faster. But if you have a per machine, the number of IOPS is now divided between all the hard drives for that machine. But you can also set it per hard drive. In Azure or Azure, that is what they do. So when you buy a machine in Azure, you pay for the number of hard drives and storage and capacity. And if you really want to have a fast machine in Azure, the best trick is to add multiple hard drives, because all the hard drives have one limitation. And then you can combine all these hard drives into running a virtual storage spaces in Azure, which now gives you the aggregated performance of all the hard drives. But in Virtual Machine Manager, you can pick and choose, either per disk or per VM, which is nice. And that looks like this. Quality of services policies. Right-click, create storage policy, give it a name, and then you define the settings. And it's either all virtual hard disks instance for its shared resources, and it's a resource allocated to each. And the name is like, which one is which? Well, it says so down here. This type of policy controls the IOPS allowed for each virtual disk on a file server that the policy is scoped for. So the text actually changed and it explains the settings. You specify the minimum IOPS, which is, well, that's the minimum, and the maximum might be 5,000 or whatever it is. And you can also you need to also specify the maximum bandwidth that this policy has. So it's going to be, I don't know, 2. But I don't like my users very much. And then you specify the storage that you want to apply this to. So you apply this to the store, which makes sense. Here's a really fast storage solution you have. Well, now you can use all the different IOPS you want to have and you can consume that. But this one, it's old and slow. So I want to have a lower policy on that machine. So people don't try to consume more resource than I have. If you build a RAID on floppies, that's defined as slow. Don't do that. So this is kind of nice. I also mentioned Azure Pack, didn't I? I said that. I'm not really sure I'm allowed to say. Well, I am. I think I am. Anybody heard of Azure Stack? Azure Stack is kind of cool. Azure Stack means that you can now next summer it will be possible to run a local version of Azure on a local prem. Now the licensing model is not really set yet, but we know so far we know this: you can't buy the software. You need to buy the entire solution. So you can buy a ready-made Azure Stack from HP, Dell, or Lenovo, or any of these vendors. And it's going to be delivered in a box. And you unwrap it, and then you plug in the cable, and then you're done. Now, there's two ways that Microsoft could license this. Either they licenses you for Azure Stack, you pay the license for that. And the other one is that they could also license you for each VM you're running. So you're going to pay the same price that you have in Azure. That's the two ways they can have it. And currently customers go like, yeah, we want to have Azure Stack. And when they figure out that might be a license model, that means that we need to pay the same amount of money that we need to pay in Azure. Why should I do that? It's my hardware. Yes, but you need to pay the license. So we're not done with that. It's eventually going to show up exactly how it's going to be. But at the same time, a lot of customers thought that if Azure Stack is coming, Azure Pack is going away. And it is. Azure Pack is going to vanish. At the same day as 2016 is released, Azure Pack is going to be reborn. Because then it's going to be named Azure Pack for Windows Server 2016. So the current version of Azure Pack, which is UR11, actually supports 2016. And they do one upgrade. You remember I talked about the network controller in 2016? The network controller is going to be supported in the new version of the Azure Pack as well. So which means that we will now be able to use the new network controller, load balancer, and all those features. And one thing really happens in that network controller that was very unexpected for me, because currently the default isolation protocol is called NVGRE. That's what Microsoft is using. And VMware is using something else called VXLAN. And the network controller in 2016 is based on VXLAN. So the default isolation engine in Hyper-V and VMM is shifting into VXLAN. And the new network controller is using VXLAN. And the nice thing about that is that there is a lot of network equipment and a lot of network adapters with offloading for VXLANs and routers that supports VXLAN. So you might set up a 2016 VXLAN network controller, or you might actually buy some hardware that supports it from the beginning. So it's going to be easier to jack in. And Azure Pack is going to upgrade or be upgraded to support that as well. So now you can either use NVGRE or you can use VXLAN, and the Azure Pack is going to follow along with all these features. So that was kind of cool, at least I think. But I have all these weird opinions. And that was it. When it comes to security, they do support, of course, the guarded host and the shielded VMs, which is very good. Now, the implementation here is not really easy. Once you do have implemented it, it's easy to control in Virtual Machine Manager. It is a nightmare to control on each host. I don't expect anyone to do shielded VMs without Virtual Machine Manager. Because in VMM, it's very simple. You specify, here's the host guardian services. Check. I need to shield this VM. Click. And you're done. If you're going to do it without Virtual Machine Manager, you need to get the keys and you need to manually protect each VM, and you need to deal with all the certificates and files and stuff manually on each host. Don't do that. It's like shifting from DNS to hosts file. Nobody wants to do hosts files anymore, or do we? No. But DNS is kind of easier. It's the same thing, right? Yeah, it's just slightly different. So they changed that, which is kind of nice. But they also actually removed some part. The Citrix XenServer is gone. It's not supported anymore. I think it's basically because Citrix doesn't support it either. Because it has shifted into be a community or freeware or download thing. And no, not really. And they are removing support from VMware vCenter 4.1 and 5.1. You need to be on VMware 5.5. That's not really the latest version of VMware either, so that shouldn't be a problem. I think it's because, I'm not sure, but I think it's because 4.1 and 5.1 is unsupported by VMware, and if it is unsupported of VMware, Microsoft can't support it. It's really tricky to support something as another vendor, and you support something that doesn't exist anymore. The app controller is officially now gone. So the app controller doesn't exist anymore, and that is one of the reasons why they need to keep the Azure Pack. And with the Azure Pack, you can have the same approach of creating machines. Now, the Windows Azure Pack is not going to look like the new version of Azure. It's going to look like the old version of Azure, meaning blue and white and tables and stuff like that. But from a functionality standpoint, it's going to be the same. You can still use PowerShell to control everything. So that's what they've done, which is nice. So when it comes to Virtual Machine Manager, the question is, should you have it or not? Well, if you are into Hyper-V and you're going to use Hyper-V, then it makes sense. If you're going to shift from VMware to Hyper-V, then it really makes sense, because then you can manage your own VMware environment while you're moving over. And that is the support. Some customers I had said, you know, the VMware support is really bad. Well, it's not really meant to be running a VMware in the long term. Why is that? Well, you know, they have their own virtualization platform. They want you to change. Why is that? You figure it out eventually. So that's what they do. But that's fine. Let's go back. So they also added, of course, the add network service, and in network service they added the following. You now have the ability to add an IPAM server, or the NVGRE server gateway, or the network controller. So here's the network controller, and you specify the machine that the network controller is running on. Now, one of the problems we have, or issues or challenges we have, is that people says, well, you can also control the switch directly here, but you can do it through the network. What kind of switch? What support should a switch have? I'm not sure I mentioned that, but what you're looking for is this switch OME. Oh my. That is what you're looking for. So whenever you're going to buy a switch that is going to be used in your fabric environment, you would like the switch to support the OMI protocol. If it does, it's fully managed by PowerShell. Doesn't really matter what kind of vendor you have. If it's fully managed by PowerShell, doesn't matter what kind of vendor you have. If Virtual Machine Manager have the ability to manage the server and the hardware, does it matter what kind of hardware you have? Nope. And if the storage is software defined, does it matter what kind of storage you have? Nope. And that's the entire idea. And that is basically the way the cloud are built today. It's like we need the following capacity, and we're going to buy that. How many of you are familiar with ILO and IDRAC? You know that that's going away, right? It's going to disappear in 2 years, because it's going to be a standard based on a RESTful API. So the ILO version you have in generation 9 on HP server is most likely to be the last, or almost the last, version of ILO ever, because HP is shifting into RESTful APIs. It just happens to be that way because Virtual Machine Manager is also going to shift into managing using a RESTful API. And the benefit of doing RESTful APIs against the server is because now you can control and configure everything. Because now they moved the storage controller, the network controller, the motherboard, and the BIOS. Everything has been moved to one location. So now you can configure everything. So now it really doesn't matter what kind of hardware you have. 3? Oh, you're a tough guy. Is it going to be easy to do an upgrade between 2016 and 2012 R2 in Virtual Machine Manager? And the answer is yes, it is. It does have the following requirements, though. You need to run it on a 2016 server. So, end of story. The only thing you do is that you're going to keep the database. You can do an in-place upgrade of the server operating system, then you uninstall Virtual Machine Manager before or after, and then you install Virtual Machine Manager in 2016, point to the database, you're done. It's actually really, really boring. If it's a clustered and highly available Virtual Machine Manager environment, then you need to do things in a certain order, but it's still not really complicated. So this is going to be like, hey, there's a new patch for Windows 10. Well, how do you install that? You say yes, and then you're done. And since it's going to look the same way, and the agents can be upgraded on the fly, it is not a big deal to do 2012 R2 to 2016. It's pretty easy. That's my 3 minutes. Questions? No questions. That's the easiest way to terminate the discussion. It's just ask for questions. Did you learn anything that you didn't know before? Was it worth the time to come here? I wouldn't say always, but this time it was, right? How many of you are currently running Hyper-V? A few of you. And how many of you are currently running KVM? None. And how many of you are currently running VMware? So it's more VMware than Hyper-V. I'm going to end this with one simple, really cool question that a guy called Ben Armstrong. Anybody know who that is? Ben Armstrong is the father behind Hyper-V. He's not really the inventor, but he's one of the guys that follow along from Connectix over to Microsoft. He's now a senior, distinguished, blah, 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 blah. He's the guy that walks up to the upper management and gets slammed when things doesn't work the way. So he's on that level. And we had a student in the class that asked him, how popular is Hyper-V against VMware? And he said this: you can flip that question around and ask yourself the following question: how many percent of the entire data center workload that is x86 based, not mainframes, just virtual machines that runs Windows or Linux, how many of them are running on a VMware platform? And that is approximately 20%. 80% runs either Hyper-V or KVM. Because none of the clouds that we have is based on VMware. For simple reasons. They didn't want to buy anything, so they developed their own, right? It's very simple. But that also means, and you should understand this, Microsoft's focus is cloud first and mobile first. And that means that everything they develop is based on Azure. And in Azure, they run Hyper-V. So this is going to continue. The investment is going to be how to run a data center based on Hyper-V. So when the question is, well, will they support VMware? Yeah. Are they going to do any improvements around that? No. Because 80% of the entire workload doesn't run on VMware, so that's not the majority of the target. It doesn't mean VMware is wrong. I run VMware on my own. I think it's really great. It's just they will have a hard time surviving because nobody's using them except small companies and enterprises, because the big ones are using something else. Just think of that for a while, and you're going to see that there's going to be changes in the future. Now I should shut up because I'm done. So thank you for stopping by and listening for me for 2 sessions, and have a great day.